Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be tackling a subject that's, well, a little bit heavy,
Mhm.
but like knowledge is power, right? So we're diving into risky behaviors that women unfortunately face, stuff that can sadly sometimes lead to violence or even, well, death.
Mhm.
And we're basing this deep dive on an article, which, by the way, outlines like 10 specific situations. And you might be surprised it's not all about like stranger danger,
Exactly.
Sometimes it's the things that are closest to us, the things we think are safe, that can actually be the riskiest.
Absolutely. And I think it's super important to say right off the bat that we're not trying to scare anyone or make you paranoid.
Right.
The goal is to equip you with knowledge,
Yeah.
to help you understand the risks so you can make smart decisions,
Right.
prioritize your safety.
Exactly. So let's just jump right into this. The first risky behavior that this article talks about is getting into relationships with convicted prisoners,
Yeah.
specifically men who are about to be released. I mean, this one might seem kind of obvious, right? Like, duh, that's dangerous, but there's actually a lot more to it than you might think.
Right, right. The article goes into the psychology of it
Right.
all.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in this idea that someone's going to change once they're out of prison,
Yeah.
especially if they're saying all the right things, talking about remorse and fresh starts.
Yeah.
But the reality is, recidivism rates are really high, especially in those first few years after release.
Mhm.
And if someone has a history of violent offenses, well, that's a major, major red flag.
Honestly, that's kind of terrifying to think about. It's like the hope for a new beginning can actually blind you to the danger.
Yeah.
The article actually mentioned a study where over 40% of men who were convicted of violent crimes ended up reoffending within like 3 years of being released.
It's a scary statistic.
Yeah, it's pretty sobering.
But, I mean, it's important not to, stereotype or make assumptions about everyone. But understanding those statistical trends, it's really crucial when you're trying to assess risk.
So it's not about writing everyone off, right?
Yeah,
But just like being informed and cautious.
exactly. It's about recognizing that, well, past behavior can often be a pretty strong indicator of what someone might do in the future.
This makes me think about that whole cycle of violence thing.
Mm,
Like people who have either experienced violence themselves or, um, perpetrated violence. They're statistically more likely to repeat those patterns. It's really
Oh,
complex.
absolutely. And breaking those cycles, it takes a lot rehabilitation, therapy, support systems.
Mm.
But on an individual level, I think the most important thing is just being aware of those patterns. And then, of course, putting your safety first.
Right. Okay, so moving on to something a little different. The next risky behavior on this list is engaging in street prostitution. Now, this is a topic that people don't really like to talk about, but it's so important that we do.
Absolutely.
Because women who engage in street prostitution, they face a much, much higher risk of violence. I mean, compared to the general population, they're
I think
actually
I agree.
0.60 to 100 times more likely to be murdered.
It's a staggering
It is
statistic.
60 to 100 times. That's insane.
And there are a bunch of reasons for this. Like with street prostitution, it's more anonymous, so it
Yeah.
makes it harder to track down whoever did it.
Yeah.
And then there's the stigma around sex work, which sadly often prevents women from even reporting crimes or seeking help.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking to think about. These women are facing such extreme danger. And then on top of that, they might not even feel safe reporting it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need a huge societal shift
Hmm.
in how we view and treat sex workers. Things like decriminalization, access to support services, challenging the stigma. Those are all crucial steps to ensure their safety and well-being.
Totally agree. Okay, so the article also highlights this other risky behavior, and it kind of ties into a certain lifestyle contact with men who are involved in drugs, violence, and crime.
Right. And this might seem like, well, duh. Of course that's dangerous.
Hmm.
But there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
It's not just about avoiding the stereotypical
Mm.
hardened criminal.
Mhm.
It's about recognizing that being involved with people who are deep in those lifestyles, it's inherently dangerous. Their
Hmm.
world is unpredictable, it's volatile, there's a much higher chance of violence.
It's like that saying, if you lie down with dogs, you'll get up with fleas.
Right.
But in this case, the fleas could be deadly. The article even mentioned a specific case where a woman was killed just because she happened to be present during a drug deal that went wrong.
Yeah.
She wasn't even involved.
Exactly. It shows you that even just being around those situations, you're putting yourself at risk. You could become collateral damage in someone else's mess.
So it's not just who you're dating, right? It's also about the company you keep, the places you go.
Yeah, exactly. Being mindful of, who you're associating with and what the potential consequences could be.
Great point. And speaking of being cautious, the article also dives into a situation where you're isolated and vulnerable hitchhiking.
Yeah, hitchhiking, especially for women, it's always been seen as risky.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, a lot of real life stories back that up. The danger is, you're getting into a car with a complete stranger.
Right.
You have no idea who they are, what their intentions are.
Yeah.
And there's a huge power imbalance there.
The article actually shared some pretty scary stories about women who were assaulted, or even worse, while hitchhiking. One story that really stuck with me was about this woman who was picked up by this like seemingly friendly driver, but then he drove her to this secluded area and attacked her.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, it's a reminder of how quickly a situation can go bad when you're alone and vulnerable like that.
It really is. And while you hear those stories, every now and then about
Mhm.
people hitchhiking safely, the reality is the risks are just too high. Especially for women, it's just not worth it.
Right, and nowadays with ride-sharing apps and all that, there are so many safer alternatives. There's really no need to put yourself in that kind of vulnerable position.
Yeah, exactly. Why take the risk when there are safer options out there?
Okay, so the next one, it's something that's become a lot more common with the whole digital age, meeting unknown men in clubs or through social media.
Right, and this is a big one, especially with online dating and all the social media interactions we have these days.
Yeah.
These platforms can be great for connecting with people, but they also open up, new avenues for potential danger.
The article really focuses on the danger of meeting someone, maybe you've only chatted online or just briefly met them in a social setting, and then going to their place or some other secluded location.
Yeah, basically, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable position with someone you don't really know.
Right, and there are unfortunately countless stories of this going horribly wrong. The article mentioned this woman who met a guy on a dating app, and she agreed to go to his apartment for their first date. And she ended up being held against her will for days.
Oh, gosh.
It's terrifying.
It is.
It just goes to show that not everyone online is who they say they are. Those initial interactions can be so deceptive.
Absolutely. You have to be super careful when you're meeting someone from online or just, from a fleeting encounter. Always meet in public first. Let your friends know where you're going and trust your gut. If something feels off, just leave.
Yeah. It's all about finding that balance between being open to new connections, but also prioritizing your safety.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And remember, you always have the right to say no, no matter what. Doesn't matter how far into the interaction you are, you can always say no.
Okay, so the article also mentions a risk that I think a lot of people don't really think about traveling to high-risk destinations. I mean, we all love to travel, see the world, right? But some places are just more dangerous for women.
hmm And it's not about saying don't travel,
Right.
It's about being informed and prepared. The article actually gives examples of specific countries where women, especially those traveling alone or in small groups, are at a higher risk for things like assault, kidnapping, you know, dangerous situations.
I think instead of just like listing countries, it's more helpful to understand the types of dangers that women face in certain regions, right?
Sure.
Like, for example, some countries have really weak laws when it comes to violence against women, or they have cultural norms that make it hard for women to report crimes or get help.
Right. And it's not just specific countries.
Yeah.
It can even be certain regions within a country. Some areas might be known for high crime rates, or maybe they don't have a strong police presence.
Yeah.
Other areas might be more isolated, or they might have a history of targeting tourists.
So it's all about doing your research, being aware of the local context, and taking precautions.
Exactly. And did you know the U.S. State Department, they actually have these travel advisories that specifically address risks for women travelers?
Really?
Yeah, they highlight things like harassment, scams that target female tourists, and even regions where they strongly discourage women from traveling alone. And they also give you information on local laws and customs, which could help you stay safe.
I had no idea. That's such good resource. It just goes to show how important it is to, be aware of those resources and use them to make informed decisions.
Absolutely, knowledge is your best weapon, especially when it comes to navigating potential risks.
Okay, so speaking of navigating risks, let's talk about something that a lot of women deal with on a daily basis, working alone in isolated locations, especially late at night.
Yeah, this one's really about, thinking critically about your work environment and the risks that might come with it.
The article talks about women who work night shifts, in remote areas, or maybe they have to walk home alone on dark paths. And these situations, they create like the perfect storm for potential attackers. You're
Mhm.
isolated, it's dark, the perpetrator has cover, and, a lone person is just an easier target.
And unfortunately, so many women find themselves in these situations because of their jobs or their economic situation. They might not have the option to choose safer working hours or, to live in a well-lit neighborhood.
That's so true. It just shows how safety and like socioeconomic factors are so intertwined.
Absolutely. And it really highlights the need for employers to provide adequate security measures and to support employees who work in potentially risky environments.
Yeah. The article actually shares these heartbreaking stories of women who were assaulted on their way home from work.
Gosh.
There was one case where this nurse, she was working the night shift and she was attacked in the hospital parking lot. You think a hospital parking lot would be safe,
Right.
but it just goes to show that even places that seem safe can become vulnerable after dark.
It's not about living in fear, though, right?
Yeah.
It's about taking practical steps to reduce the risks. Things like carrying a personal alarm, letting someone know where you are, being aware of your surroundings. These little things can make a big difference.
I always tell my friends to share their location with me when they're walking alone at night.
That's a good one.
It gives me peace of mind, and it could be really helpful in an emergency.
Definitely. And even just things like walking with confidence, like you know where you're going and you're not afraid,
Yeah.
that can deter attackers.
Yeah.
Criminals, they often target people who look vulnerable or distracted.
Right, right. It's about projecting that sense of awareness and confidence. Okay, so this next behavior the article talks about is a little bit more nuanced. It's about frequenting bars and clubs where there's a lot of heavy drinking.
Now, this isn't about saying women shouldn't go out and have fun with friends.
Right.
It's about being aware of the potential dangers that come with excessive drinking, especially in certain environments.
You know, I've always felt a little uncomfortable in like really crowded bars where people are drinking a lot.
Yeah.
The atmosphere can feel so unpredictable. It's easy to like lose track of your friends or just what's going on around you.
That makes sense. And the article talks about how there's a real link between alcohol and aggression.
Hmm.
You know, men who drink heavily are more likely to be unpredictable and violent. And it's not even just about being the target of that aggression. You could get caught in the crossfire if a fight breaks out, or if someone's just like not thinking clearly because they're drunk.
Yeah, you're right. It's like you become part of someone else's drunken drama, even if you don't want to be. The article mentioned this case where a young woman, she was fatally injured in a bar fight. And it all started because a group of guys had been drinking too much, and she wasn't even involved in the fight.
It's a tragic example of how quickly things can escalate when alcohol's involved.
Right.
And even if you're not drinking heavily yourself, you're still at risk if others around you are.
So it's about being aware of the overall atmosphere, how much people are drinking, and again, trusting your gut if something feels unsafe.
Exactly. And it's a good idea to have a plan. Make sure you have a designated driver, a safe way to get home, and let your friends know where you are.
Right. Okay, shifting gears a bit here. The next one's about working in psychiatric institutions.
Yeah. This might seem a little out of left field.
Yeah.
But these environments, they have their own unique challenges and potential dangers.
The article emphasizes that, patients in these institutions, they might have serious mental health issues, and some of them might be prone to violence.
Right. And it's not about being afraid of these individuals. It's about understanding that there need to be really specific safety protocols in place
Mm.
for both the staff and the patients. Unfortunately, assaults on staff members are not uncommon in these facilities.
I can imagine. There was this case in the article where a nurse was really badly beaten by a patient who was having a psychotic episode. It just shows you that working in these environments, you need special training, enough staff, and really clear safety procedures.
Absolutely. And it's not just about physical safety either. It's also about emotional and psychological well-being. Working in these settings, it can be incredibly demanding and stressful.
Yeah.
Staff members need to have support and resources to deal with the challenges they face.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a reminder that workplace safety goes beyond those like traditional settings. And some professions, they just require specific safeguards to reduce the risks. Okay, get ready for this one. Because this last risky behavior that the article talks about is maybe the most chilling.
Okay.
It's about breaking up with a partner in an isolated or closed space.
This one really gets into the The complexities of relationships and how violence can happen even in places that seem familiar.
Right.
Breakups can be so emotionally charged.
Yeah.
And if a partner has a history of aggression or, right, like possessiveness, things can get out of control very quickly.
The article really focuses on situations where women are lured back to an ex-partner's apartment, maybe under false pretenses.
Yeah.
Often it's to collect belongings after a breakup or divorce. And it shows how dangerous it can be to underestimate the potential for violence, even from someone you knew and trusted.
It's like walking into a lion's den, even if you think the lion is tame.
Yeah.
There was this story in the article. This woman, she went to her ex-boyfriend's apartment to pick up some clothes. He seemed totally calm, even apologetic. But as soon as she walked inside, he locked the door and attacked her.
It's scary how quickly things can change when you're alone and vulnerable with someone who has that potential for violence.
It really is. And the key takeaway here is that breakups can be really volatile. You have to prioritize safety, especially if you're dealing with someone who has a history of aggression or possessiveness. Even if they seem fine, it's always better to err on the side of caution. Meet in public places or have someone go with you if you need to get your things.
It's not about being paranoid, right? It's just about being smart and protecting yourself.
Yes, exactly. It's about recognizing that even in those seemingly safe, familiar situations, there's always a chance of danger. And taking steps to minimize that risk is so important.
Wow, we've covered a lot. And it's clear that these risky behaviors, they're not always black and white. There's a lot of nuance to them. We'll be back in a bit to talk about some of the key takeaways from all of this and how we can actually apply this knowledge to our own lives.
Sounds good.
It's kind of crazy, right? All these behaviors we've talked about, they seem so normal on the surface, but underneath, there's this hidden layer of danger.
It really makes you think, doesn't
No.
it? Risk isn't always obvious. It can be lurking in those everyday things, those things we take for granted.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay aware, to think critically about the situations we're in. For me, a big takeaway is that it's not just about avoiding certain people or places. It's about understanding the dynamics of a situation and, trusting your gut when something feels off, even if you can't explain why.
Your intuition is a powerful thing. It's often picking up on things that your conscious mind hasn't even processed yet.
It's like, have you ever been walking alone at night and you just get this feeling like someone's following you?
Oh, yeah.
Even if you don't actually see anyone, your body's reacting to those subtle signs of danger.
Exactly. And it's so important to listen to those feelings. Take steps to protect yourself, even if it seems like you're overreacting.
Yeah.
Better safe than sorry, right?
Right. Another thing that really struck me is how many of these risks are tied to bigger societal problems.
Oh, absolutely.
The dangers that sex workers face, it's made so much worse by the stigma and the way they're marginalized.
Yeah, it's true. They're so vulnerable because they lack legal protection, access to health care, and just basic acceptance from society. If we want to improve their safety, we have to address those systemic issues.
And then there's the whole issue of alcohol. It seems like so many of these situations we talked about involved heavy drinking.
Yeah.
Which, alcohol lowers inhibitions,
Right.
makes people more impulsive, more likely to do something dangerous.
It's like alcohol can be fun, it can make people feel more social, but it also kind of takes the brakes off our behavior. We have to be aware of how much we're drinking and how it might be affecting others around us.
Right. It's about personal responsibility, but it's also about changing the culture.
Right.
Not glorifying or normalizing excessive drinking.
Totally. We need to challenge those norms if we want to see real change.
This deep dive has also made me think a lot about victim blaming and how important it is to shut down those harmful narratives.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that if a woman dresses a certain way or goes out late at night, she's somehow asking for it.
That kind of thinking is so dangerous. It just perpetuates this culture where violence against women is tolerated. It puts the blame on the victim instead of the person who actually committed the crime.
Exactly. We need to hold perpetrators accountable no matter what. A woman's clothes or her decision to go out, that should never be seen as an excuse for violence.
Absolutely. It's about respecting boundaries, understanding consent, and creating a culture where women's safety is the priority.
This whole conversation has been a good reminder that safety is an ongoing process, not just a set of rules you follow. It's about being aware, thinking critically, and, being willing to challenge the status quo.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
No,
And it's not just a conversation for women either,
right.
right?
Definitely not.
Men have a huge role to play in making the world safer for everyone.
Totally. We need to be talking to the men in our lives, sons, brothers, fathers, friends, about respect, consent, and how to challenge those harmful attitudes.
It's about creating a culture of empathy, understanding, and accountability. And that starts with having these open and honest conversations.
One thing that's really resonated with me is just the power of knowledge and awareness. The more we understand about these risks, the better equipped we are to make smart decisions and stay safe.
Knowledge is power. It helps us identify red flags, set boundaries, and take those proactive steps to protect ourselves and the people we care about.
And it's not just about preventing bad things from happening. It's
Yeah.
also about feeling more empowered, more in control. When you feel informed and prepared, you're less likely to feel scared or limited.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your power, living your life to the fullest, while still being aware of those potential risks.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've covered a lot, and I know it can feel heavy, but I hope this conversation has given you some knowledge and maybe inspired you to think more critically about safety, your own safety, and the safety of the people around you.
I think these conversations are so important.
Yeah.
They raise awareness, promote understanding, and ultimately they help create a safer world for everyone.
We can't control everything that happens, but we can make informed choices, advocate for change, and support each other.
Right? Creating a world where everyone feels safe and empowered.
That's the goal. Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've talked about individual behaviors and societal factors, but I think the bigger question is, how do we create a world where women's safety isn't a constant worry? What would that world look like? And how do we get there?
That's a great question. And it's one that deserves our attention. It's a vision worth striving for. But it's going to take all of us working together to challenge the norms, dismantle those harmful systems, and build a society where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Keep the conversation going. Let's keep learning, sharing, and supporting each other as we work towards a world where everyone can feel safe and empowered.
Thanks for joining us.
I don't know about you, but after a deep dive like this, it's easy to feel, well, kind of overwhelmed. We've talked about some pretty heavy stuff, the risks that women face. It's a lot.
Yeah, it can be a lot to take in.
But I think the important thing to remember is that, being aware of these things, it's not about living in fear.
Right.
It's about, taking back our power.
I agree. Knowledge really is the antidote to fear. The more we understand these risks, the better we can, navigate them, make choices that keep us safe.
Exactly. And it's not about being, suspicious of everyone or constantly looking over your
Yeah.
shoulder.
Mhm.
It's more about, having that awareness, trusting your gut, and taking some basic precautions.
Finding that balance, living your life, enjoying yourself, but also being mindful.
Yeah, exactly. And, we have to be realistic. We can't control everything. Bad things happen sometimes, even when we're careful.
That's true. We can't live in a bubble.
Right. But we're not helpless either.
Absolutely not. We can empower ourselves. We can learn skills, strategies, things that can help us reduce the risk and, know what to do if something does happen.
One thing that's really stuck with me from all this is self-defense training.
Oh, yeah.
Knowing how to protect yourself physically, that can be so empowering.
For sure. Self-defense classes, they teach you those physical techniques,
Yeah.
but they also give you confidence. They help you learn how to assess a situation, set boundaries, and defend yourself if you have to.
Right. And it's not just about physical self-defense either. It's about verbal self-defense too. Knowing how to stand up for yourself, how to de-escalate a situation, or how to call for help.
Those are all such valuable skills. And it's important to practice those things, to think about those scenarios so you're more prepared if you ever find yourself in a dangerous situation.
Right. It's like those fire drills. You might never need to use what you learned, but if you do, it could make all the difference.
Exactly. And remember, safety is not something you have to do alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's about having a support system,
Mm-hmm.
having people you trust, people you can rely on.
Yeah, that's so important. Whether it's sharing your location with a friend when you're walking alone at night or having a code word you can use if you're in trouble, having those connections can be so important.
Definitely. And don't be afraid to speak up.
Yeah.
If you see something that seems wrong, something that doesn't feel safe, say something. You could be helping yourself or someone else.
We all have a responsibility to look out for each other.
Absolutely. If we want to create a safer world, it takes all of us working together. Challenging those harmful attitudes, supporting survivors, pushing for real change.
At the beginning of this deep dive, I said knowledge is power. But I think it's more than that. Knowledge is also hope.
I like that.
By talking about these risks, by having these conversations, we're like shining a light on the darkness. We're not staying silent. And that's how we create a path to a world that's safer, more equitable.
It's a journey worth taking.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Stay safe and stay empowered.